Hey folks, thanks for the positivity and just generally the feedback about the first attempt at one of these being a pre-game rundown and analysis prior to the game for the last round of the Malifaux World Series that I posted, based on essentially just the fact that I found the experience pretty positive. I think I'm going to stick to it, though I definitely do want to keep working on being a little bit more focused and productive, and to that end, maybe keeping things a little bit shorter without necessarily losing a lot of content going forward. I think generally I put out something that had a lot of worthwhile material in it, but it took a little too long to get there. Let's take a look at what I have going into this second round of this event. So, the second round is on a standard Raid the Vaults pool. The map is both, on the left here and a little bit on the right with the pool. So, pool wise, we have In Your Face, Deliver Message, Information Overload, Protected Territory, and Ensnare. So, overall, before getting into the considerations predicated on the matchup, standard Raid the Vault, so on the more sort of straightforwardly confrontational end of things for GG4, but a set of schemes that is pushing in the other direction, is pretty marker oriented. In Your Face is certainly an exception there as a pretty aggro scheme, and I suspect In Your Face is going to be a pretty popular pick in this round, and I think probably in this game. But beyond that, deliver a message, overload, territory, and ensnare for marker E schemes. Beyond that, specifically for me, I am playing into another Swiss player, another really pleasant opponent in Rosmaris, or Robin, who declared Angler as a consistent Bayou player into Lucius this round. And we have the crew's already put together, and the game is coming up tomorrow, so essentially all of the relevant pregame information is available to work with. Not a huge shock once I remembered that Angler was a keyword that they played some amount of, that they chose to take Angler here. Angler is definitely, especially when we're talking about the bucket, is a pretty solid sort of fighty master in Bayou. Definitely a significant threat, capable of doing a lot of damage and a reasonable amount of displacement, which is a pretty good recipe for vaults a lot of the time. So beyond that, we have the build over here for Robin, the Bucket Bruce. In terms of keyword models, we have Bog and a Hermit. Adding to that, we have Alphonse with 12 cups of coffee, Bryn, and Bo Peep. Definitely the kind of list that I sort of mentally categorize in that, like, I'm worried about having my flimsier models just die to Seamus kind of vibe. Though obviously this is a different teleporting assassin on my side. But yeah, not the sort of weirdest build direction to go in if you're essentially trying to build for a lot of resilience, and sort of accepting the fact that I have a fair amount of flexibility in being able to deploy a threat that can guarantee damage, at least against targets that don't have layers of protection, which you'll notice is, a lot of the models in this Bayou list do have multiple layers of protection. Bo Peep not so much, setting aside the Hermits nor Bruce, but everybody else, the Clampetts are Soulstone users with armor. Bog is sort of hard to wound and a Soulstone user. Alphonse is hard to wound and a Soulstone user, and sort of has additional reduction in glowy. This doesn't look like the best list to facilitate that, but it is there. Bryn is serene, but more important, protected, and can cancel triggers, which I think is, in addition to the fact that he's trying to solve some sort of card quality issues for this crew, which is often what Bryn is in part for, is probably an even bigger part of his value in this matchup than normal. Lucius and Elite in general, given the nature of Mimic as an action, copying actions onto other models in the crew, models that can stone, or even if you replace into Kavatica, can bake in suits, or Allura described do the same, is a keyword that has sort of a well above average access to powerful triggers, even sort of borrowing from models that wouldn't normally be able to guarantee those triggers or to produce them in volume. And so Bryn's canceling activity makes a lot of sense. I think that this is somewhat reminiscent of what I was seeing in round one, in that I sort of fundamentally understand the rationale behind the crew build here. And I don't entirely disagree with it. Obviously, when you are playing into threats like Lucius, sometimes you can feel kind of constrained in what is reasonable to do, and you're not necessarily happy that you sort of have to skew toward this level of kind of bunkering up, but that might feel like essentially the safest or really the reasonable way to play the game. So kind of I'm not happy to do it, but I feel like I have to do it situation, and that might well be true here. But that's a little bit more reasonable to do on vaults, as long as you have a plan to deal with the fact that you might be a little bit outnumbered, and especially given that this scheme pool is pushing you to have more AP and be able to do some interacting stuff, you have some idea of how you're going to sort of offset the fact that you are, from the get-go, cutting down on your ability to really accomplish the pool. In terms of other notes here, the Hermits are certainly a reasonable hire into a lot of my threats, notably at essentially 8 effective health with the armor and, their baseline 6 wounds. They are a little bit difficult for Lucius to simply kill, even though they're a model that can't necessarily prevent him from having access to his full damage track if he wants it. 8 damage is, in theory, what he tops out at, but that's, with everything lining up, that's a red joker, a stone, and a ram, so that's quite an ask, even though you might, in theory, consider doing that just to get rid of a model like a Hermits, because of the way that they're going to limit your ability to control where your damage is going. And it will be interesting. This is, I think, something that I'm going to get back to and sort of make a bit of a focal point here. It'll be interesting to see how all of this unpacks and sort of presents itself moving up the board towards me, because there are a couple of really 4 even of the models hired are models that can do a decent job of facilitating other models getting where they're trying to go, but there is also sort of this issue where it's not clear who exactly wants to be leading the charge. And that's something I think I'm going to be looking at and sort of trying to delay some decisions on my own part in turn 1 to react to what information I'm given in that regard, and sort of make the best plays as a result. On my end, I am playing Lucius 2, though I think Lucius 1 would have been a very reasonable take in this pool, and based on what I kind of roughly expected I was going to be seeing. So this is a case where I think both titles had a strong case. Lucius 2, Scribe, Changeling, White Eyes, a Lawyer, and Agent 46, as well as an imported Insidious Madness and Delirium. And the 2 out of keyword hires first are for a few reasons. One is just, while this is not the most terrain dense World Series Vassal table, it's reasonably dense, and I knew that. So I wanted to have a little bit more access to a lot of terrain mitigation, especially because I kind of thought that I wanted some elements of my crew to be able to sort of play a little bit cagier and not make it easy for particularly the buckets to get on them and sort of access really kind of dishing out damage into them too early in the game. It seems very likely that Robin wants pretty badly to take In Your Face in this pool. Like, that seems like by a margin, the most appealing scheme here for the Bayou crew. And so I wanted Delirium, who was one of the models I was using to match on 9 to give myself better options for in-your-face. I wanted to make sure that Delirium, as a non-Soulstone user, and so a model that the Clampetts could, in theory, control damage against, to be a model that could be in reasonably impactful spots on the table while still being kind of hard for the Clampetts to actually do effective damage to, just difficult to target. And the Madness similarly can move up the table, can use its move 6 in Incorporeal to hide behind terrain usefully while still being in a decent spot to one move and kind of be where somewhere where it might want to be for scoring purposes. There's also a bit of an additional benefit in that with a lot of the marker schemes in the pool, and it's a decent bet that I'm going to want to take one of Protected Territory or Ensnare. Those Incorporeal models give me the ability to, with Lucius down the wrong path, my own stuff with Drawn Out Secrets, and I don't necessarily have to worry about models or terrain intervening to just put them where I want them to go and put the marker where I'm trying to put it, and all of a sudden have that stuff set up without a lot of sort of complications coming into it. Essentially, just if I need it to happen, and assuming I am willing to spend the resources, I can make it happen. Beyond that, they're both terrifying, and I figured that Bayou wouldn't necessarily be taking inferiority complex in the matchup, and so that would just sort of add a little bit of card pressure. Terrifying isn't necessarily something I tend to rely on to do any particular thing, and certainly not to be impactful in any specific engagement, but over time it can add up. And they do offer a couple of tools that I think are particularly relevant for this for vaults. So against a relatively tall low model count crew, scatter on vaults is inherently pretty useful. I can potentially concentrate my resources on one side or a couple of vaults, and so sort of even further skew the fact that I have a numbers advantage, and then use either the madness itself or a mimicked scatter to kind of offset the fact that I'm giving the Bayou crew a more sort of fair fight on the other side by just saying, well, never mind, you're not actually going to be sort of scoring anything over there either. Delirium has access to Touch of Madness, which is, in addition to the terrifying, sort of another sort of layering discard and so sort of resource attack effect. And I'm not necessarily trying to get to, this isn't like an execute build where I want to have all of that actually get me to, and now you have nothing, and that's sort of my win condition. But it's one of those sort of effective triggers that I can sort of inflate my access to because of the way the crew works. And the ranged attack, Psychotic Influence on Delirium is a pretty good attack in general, but I think it is even more helpful, or it is particularly powerful in Elite Mimic, because the ability to convert conditions into other conditions, it gives Lucius himself quasi armor. For example, if I turn someone's focused into like stunned or something like that, all of a sudden now, if it were focused, it would allow them to get around his negative base defense. And then, assuming they only had the one focus, they wouldn't have to have conditions on them when they actually swung on Lucius. But now, all of a sudden, that it's stunned, they have to deal with flexible morality, right? That they have to actually do something to deal with the negative that is being imposed, and they lose access to their triggers, right? They get all the negatives that are sort of normal with stunned, and then also he essentially has a damage reduction into them. So useful if it turns out that Lucius is specifically the primary focus here for the bucket, and I guess Alphonse is sort of a secondary damage dealer, which he might be. That might be the plan on the Bayou side, is just try to get as much threat on Lucius as quickly as possible, and just try to get him out of the game, which would be bad if that went too well. And then just beyond that, with the condition stacking, slow, obviously also good, staggered potentially helpful, if I'm trying to sort of draw a target in and then make it difficult for the Bayou crew to rescue that target, which all of the movement effects on the Bayou side could potentially otherwise sort of undo some of the work that I've done if I, down the wrong path to model in or something like that. Distracted is unusually good in Elite Mimic because against a lot of my crew, you can't like stone through it. You essentially have to spend an AP either flipping on a negative or concentrating, right? Because of inhuman physiology. And finally, and sort of much more narrowly, misery and opportunist. Opportunist adversary actually interacts a little bit with agent, where agent wants to impose adversary on enemies anyway to be more efficient offensively, and agent and delirium can tag team a little bit there to stack a little bit more damage, or actually just for vaults, sometimes just right pop enemies off of vaults that they're contesting. Finally, while it didn't end up bearing out, the angler crew can play a bit of a hazardous game, which is something that can actually be reasonably effective under the right circumstances into a Lucius crew, because it's a way to do damage that doesn't worry as much about that. It would only care about either terrain mitigation or like other damage reduction, and those are tools that the crew doesn't have a lot of natively, right? It has a lot of weird defensive stuff and defensive stuff that can sometimes frustrate other sort of tools to do damage more efficiently, but not necessarily hazardous that to that great a degree. Okay. In terms of pool stuff, I think that the angler crew here is somewhat limited in what it's reasonable for it to take. I already called that in your face as a scheme that it is, I think, very clearly both building to probably want to take and also to try to make unappealing, as sort of nominally feel like this is one of the like most naturally sort of good and sensible options in the crew to in the pool to any crew. Bog and Alphonse are two fairly tough targets, especially with 6 stones banked, to get through that quickly if I want to kill them. And Lucius can certainly get to a position to like threaten to be eligible for in your face and to do the killing himself. So having him have to do that into models that actually don't let him just sort of top out on damage that easily is pretty reasonable. But beyond that, deliver a message is often kind of a 1-point scheme compromise when you take it anyway. It's pretty hard to get that second point, just because the keeping their master alive, and then given that masters are often late activations on turn 5 anyway, because you're often trying to sort of sit and react to scheme stuff on the end of the game with your most powerful activations. It's just a big ask to have their master be alive, be in a spot you want them to be in, and have that marker nearby. So I don't think that the angler crew here necessarily has an incredible set of tools to enable that anyway, and it seems very likely that the very strong preference on Robin's part, and probably on mine, would be to just have the enemy master be dead fairly quickly regardless. And so even more reason to treat deliver like really a 1-point scheme. And I think given that this pool isn't as sort of demanding and sort of all around unappealing as the pool was in round 1, I don't think there's much reason to consider making that kind of compromise here. I think we can do better. I certainly think I can. I think I'm a little bit more generally enabled to play this pool pretty effectively, but on the Bayou side, I think that's still true. And given that probably looking over to me, Robin might reasonably sort of assess I have pretty good options in the pool that might kind of compel you to at least aim high, right? Like, it might not be a case where we're just sort of trying to keep scoring low is that plausible plan. Information overload is a pretty good scheme when it sort of suits you, but I think the tools aren't really there on the Bayou side here, right? Bog drops, I guess, in sort of additional marker beyond just with the use of his actions with his bonus, but that doesn't really add up to. I want to sort of attempt to go up and over a elite isn't exactly a marker specialist crew, but I definitely think that would be a very bold choice to make. And so I'd be somewhat surprised. It's also a scheme that has to sort of make itself somewhat apparent just based on what you're doing early. So even if I'm not expecting to see it, I can kind of adjust based on the information I'm being given. And so I think while a lot of this applies to me too, I think I'm realistically looking at almost certainly interface and then one of territory, probably protected territory, or maybe ensnare, with the idea with ensnare being that the Bayou crew is going to be trying to use like the displacement effects mostly on the bucket, I would imagine, to take one of my models and bring it in to some prearranged spot with markers already in place, with the caveat that I can do a lot of the same, and I think I have better tools to sort of undo that, or sort of either get the model out without having to activate it and surrender ensnare, or otherwise just sort of diffuse that. So unless the fight goes particularly well, which is certainly possible, I think scoring is going to be a little bit tough for the Bayou crew. I think I could consider, with the caveat that I still just think deliver is a little under ambitious, essentially. I think I could consider any of the schemes, but I think they're all sort of as appealing or more for me than they are on the other end, with probably the more straightforwardly appealing choices being in your face if I think I can get through one of those two henchmen, which that's an ask, but it's not that unreasonable. And yeah, either territory or ensnare with overload. The real upside of overload here is it's something that would allow either of us, and really more me realistically, to do even less sort of interacting with the Bayou crew, because other than the markers being around, even protected territory, which doesn't that directly sort of interact with the enemy crew, at least requires you to make sure that you're getting markers in spots where they can't go like stand by them. Whereas with overload, they just have to exist. Okay. So all of that sort of said, I am expecting this to be a game that is. I don't think this is going to be like a 3-2 game necessarily, though. Given the strategy, that the kind of like, I guess, drop all that, never mind, let's brawl sort of like dynamic could certainly play out. This is a situation where that's not inconceivable. I think that is something I shouldn't let happen. I should sort of opt out of pursuing a game like that. I think that is one way to sort of shift the dynamic, which I'm inclined to think is sort of trending towards me, back the other way, or sort of just make things messier. And I think in general, that's sort of strategically a reasonable thing to look to do if you think you are in a bit of a disadvantaged spot. Then making things less predictable and kind of just adding more variance and complexity is probably a decent thing to do, because it's just making that sort of likely negative outcome more in doubt. It's making it harder to tell what's going to happen. Whereas if you think you are in kind of a naturally advantaged spot, often you kind of just want to maintain the status quo, right? Like keep things more certain, more sort of dependable, introduce less uncertainty, because you just want to sort of ensure the outcome that is very likely to happen already. So a final thing before I sort of wrap this and y'all get to see how much this sort of matched what actually happened. A little bit of a thought experiment about what the Bayou crew could be doing to unpack here and what I could do in response to that. So what I'm sort of really focusing on here is when the Bayou crew is coming out and coming at me, because you do, right, you need to get models at least to sort of the midfield area by turn 2-ish, even if you're not looking to be pretty aggressive. What is leading the charge on the Bayou side? And the reason why that is sort of a difficult question to answer, or an interesting one to answer, is that I do have a lot of ways to kind of multiply threat on especially whatever is sort of dangled in front of me. I already called out down the wrong path on Lucius as a tool that is very good at, essentially it's like lure plus, in that it's a lure that ignores concealment. Doesn't have to go towards Lucius. It's just, move the target, and then has the built-in coordinated for even a little bit of extra damage when that comes up. Worth noting that the Clampetts have a very similar action. Drawn to the Seas is almost the same action, but it doesn't ignore concealment, and has a more restricted movement, but not that much more restricted, assuming you want to move the model forward, right? The model has to move towards a tide marker, and I guess it's a tide marker in that model's line of sight, which maybe that actually adds up to something a little bit more restrictive. It sort of has coordinated built in that an angular model can just hit the model. Afterwards, strong action. The doesn't ignore concealment part here is actually a bigger issue in this matchup, though, because you can't really ignore concealment via other means into Agent or White Eyes or the chain, right? Like into some of the stuff that you probably would want to be luring early because of inhuman physiology, right? Because you can't use positives to get around the negative. So I have that. I have a sort of shorter range displacement effect leading the witness on the scribe. I have the ability to turn into doppelganger for access to lures. I have a lot of potential displacement. So let's sort of talk through a few ways that the Bayou crew could be coming at me. So I think the most aggressive way, by far, that sort of makes sense, or the two aggressive ways, are for Alphonse to toss, and it would be at a slightly different angle here, but to toss the bucket up, and this is essentially the let's get this party started right away option. The, I think, presumed upside, the reason why this is sort of a conceivable line, is if we are on the Bayou end thinking about taking In Your Face, this is a way to try to get the bucket into position to then get up and get Agent in or get Delirium in, right? And really just start piling on damage and hopefully get that first point of In Your Face secured relatively quickly, and if the sort of pressure is being turned on quickly enough, potentially without my being able to react as much as I'd want to the application of the threat. And sort of continuing in sort of the line of thinking of maybe you just sort of introduce a little bit of chaos if you're not as confident in the matchup, there's sort of an argument from the standpoint of I don't know that I am as happy with my spot otherwise, so I'm just going to kind of make something happen, and it's less clear what the outcome of the game is from that point, even if the exposing the Clampetts like this does definitely have sort of a risk associated with it of what if the Clampetts then just kind of get blown up, which they certainly could. So that's one way that things could get really aggressive. I think the response here is just for me to sort of keep my tools available to me to really sort of punish the Clampetts as early as possible. I think given how much damage they represent in the Bayou crew, even if there aren't concrete points attached to killing the Clampetts, it would be very helpful to me. It would really help me to sort of offset concerns I might have about attrition. And so what that roughly means, I think, is I would want to maintain the ability to apply Analyze Weakness and then start unloading, and 6 stones is probably going to mean that I'm not going to be doing, chunks of 5 or something like that right away. But given that they only have 10 health, that's probably going to work out as long as I have resources and I use them reasonably well. So essentially just keeping my options open so that I can get that Analyze on, and going into turn 2, right, assuming I'm not killing them turn 1, which I'm probably not, that I have the ability to pretty quickly turn around and in turn 2 apply Analyze immediately, ideally without activating Agent, because that would be that's a situation where the sort of natural desire to wait on agent and have a fast activation might be wrong. It might just be better to apply Analyze and live with it. But ideally have Analyze available without having to do that, and then again, kind of just trying to convert resources while also, as much as I can, not making it easy on the Clampetts to be in range to kill agent or to kill Delirium before they go down. Not sort of allowing it to be a productive trade-off, even if that 1 point for the Master might still not really be an ideal outcome on the Bayou side. The other particularly aggressive and sort of slower, but still pretty aggressive route would be, because Alphonse has 12 cups, using, I think, mostly Bo Peep to give Alphonse fast and a couple of Glowy. I do think that there is a pretty significant limit on how much Glowy is going to end up on Alphonse, just given that, like, the rest of this crew isn't really apparently designed to, like, do this, right? To sort of do damage to him in reasonable chunks so that he can kind of build that stuff up, and then just try to get Alphonse up the table and be annoying with 12 cups, kind of with the idea in mind that, like, Lucius is pretty annoyed if he can't take his bonus. White Eyes certainly is annoyed, right? Because that's both mobility and damage. Other folks in the crew are sort of maybe a little bit. The Scribe, I guess, if it can't attach an upgrade, is pretty annoyed. I don't think it's quite a backbreaking effect to have to deal with 12 cups a little bit. But the fact that I can't take bonuses would be kind of annoying, and then actually the mark territory sort of mass marker removal would be pretty useful as well if I am not careful, and that's something that Alphonse could use to actually, like, disrupt my, like, marker upgrade game to some extent. So that would be, I think, the other relatively aggressive approach, with the downside that while I think Alphonse is not likely to go down fast, that is sort of naturally feeding me a model who I might want to be able to pile on for in your face anyway. And so I think my response here would be somewhat, obviously Analyze weakness doesn't really matter in this case. It would just be to try to then not be dumb and give Alphonse the ability to, like, really rack up a lot of, like, disruptive effect with the combination of diversion and marker removal. Also to not give him the ability to, like, get to my more fragile stuff, kill the Scribe or a Changeling with blast damage, right? Because he has the ability to build in his blast damage. And just essentially push resources in. The big additional downside to really being aggressive with any model but the Clampetts is the Clampetts can get around the Scribe's Betrayal aura and the cheating damage aura on the Lawyer by virtue of its ability to ignore enemy auras, Eye of the Hurricane. And the Alphonse, for example, wouldn't be able to do that, and so Alphonse would be a little less capable of defending himself because he would start running out of cards pretty quickly and cheating, and it actually would start doing damage potentially as well with the Lawyer around. So if neither of those things happen, and both of those seem like pretty risky lines, even if, as I said, there might be some argument for just sort of assuming some risk, depending on the way that the Bayou side rates the game, they might be a little bit more careful and try to move up the board, but keep more in range of the Hermits. That's another problem with being super aggressive. You're losing access to the take the hit model in the crew, probably. And lead with one of the Clampetts or Alphonse. Maybe Bryn, just because Bryn can kind of sack attacks elsewhere. That actually is not the craziest thing now that I think of it. Or with Bog to try to use Laugh Off as a way to prevent my movement manipulation stuff from happening. So if it's most of these models, I think I just basically want to take advantage of the fact that I am presumably being given a little bit more of the table to unpack and try to get in spots where, again, I'm not making it easy for the Clampetts to just sort of walk up and easily, boom, boom, arrange something that is going to lead quickly to a very positive outcome for the Bayou side, right? Delirium is probably the model that I need to most have in mind about in sort of arranging things, because it seems so likely that killing Delirium is a point scoring outcome in addition to like a generally good outcome. White Eyes is another more realistic target that I wouldn't want to give up early, but is, I think, a little bit more acceptable to contemplate losing, just because it's just, bad from an attrition and like a model availability standpoint. It's not concretely costing me anything the same way. And just to try to set up so that I can, maybe with Lucius take whatever that most forward model is and start exposing them a little. So if the hermits are in the neighborhood, this might be a little labor intensive, right? Because it's very feasible that the hermits might take the hit on the first down the wrong path, but I would then, have to move the hermits away. And then just start taking whatever model is furthest forward and trying to sort of isolate them from the crew by luring them into mine, and not like lining them up to like have a really great activation offensively, but just to sort of like make the Bayou crew uncomfortable, maybe try to force them to scramble to try to catch up, or actually just get access to that more forward model as, okay, now you're kind of out of place and your defenses are kind of down. Let me essentially like move towards doing what I would have done if you had just been very aggressive yourself, right? Like start capitalizing on that and applying damage. The sort of big exception to that is obviously if Bog is the model that is leading, which he is often the model who gets left behind because he can spend a lot of his early AP using off the path as a way to get other models around the table. It's a reasonably effective sort of movement and card filtering effect. But given that he's pretty tough with defense 6 and again the sort of hard to wound adjacent effect, he might be actually chosen to be pretty aggressive in this one because he's not that easy for me to sort of dive into. And with Laugh Off, it's not like I can just start luring him forward that easily. And so if I'm starting to get that impression, which really what the possibility that I'm going to be sort of given a Laugh Off model as the sort of like tip of the spear, what that possibility I think suggests that I should be doing more than anything is changing a little bit what I might naturally do to sequence my activations turn 1. Very often turn 1 with an elite crew, in addition to just sort of picking up space on the table, some of what you're doing is you're distributing upgrades in a way that is filtering cards to get you access to sort of the hand that you want to do something especially impactful and productive towards the end of turn 1 and into turn 2. And that might normally mean, for example, taking White Eyes and using the replace upgrade relatively early, either to turn into Alan just for the most draw, because Alan draws 2 between the upgrade draw and his own Nefarious Pact draw before he replaces back, or Klaus as the sort of draw better. Klaus only nets 1 card, but if I have a queen or a king in my discard that is looking particularly appealing and I'm otherwise fairly happy about sort of the generic quality of my hand, you might turn into Klaus and use information exchange to get access to a better card while still being card neutral. And so +1 rather than +2 cards, but then upgrading a card instead. And White Eyes is very often the model that I choose to upgrade that way, turn 1, because White Eyes gets more movement out of it, often because you're turning into a model for like setup reasons in turn 1. That model is then not like careening up the board. Klaus is almost certainly spending an AP not moving and doing something card related. And Alan is probably focusing and could then walk, but then sometimes just wants to put down another marker to have more sort of set up for future stuff. And because White Eyes is a 40, and so the replace, you get a little bit more movement just by being bigger in the first place. But also, assuming you don't somehow take damage early with White Eyes, because you are turning into something 8 cost and then healing 2 when you replace back, and so healing above your starting 9. It's a way to get essentially a move or more's worth of sort of total move, even without actually taking a walk action, because you can turn into the other model, do whatever you're going to do, and then turn back into White Eyes, right? So that's already the sort of the 2 bases worth of movement. But then in overhealing is White Eyes, right? Because White Eyes, when it overheals, is then going to move 3. You get really a pretty decent little move to not just be sitting in your deployment zone as you do all of this stuff, which is nice. So that's often what I would do, but into a model like Bog, forward, who I still want to put in an uncomfortable situation. Obviously, the sort of factor of laugh off is going to make it harder for me to accomplish things early into a model, but the thing about sort of very strong defensive tech is people often sort of just plan on this stuff just sort of works as intended, and so there can be sort of an upside in if you have unusual ways to sort of attack those defenses. You can kind of catch people essentially unprepared for not being able to rely on the sort of like common defaults. And what that would mean in turn 1 is I would want to avoid using the replace upgrade early. Probably White Eyes would get something like the draw 2 discard 1 upgrade. Again, just sort of with the let's get sort of our card quality up in mind. And maybe set up Lucius into Agent as my final couple of activations, which is pretty common anyway, and use Lucius's bonus on Agent to have Agent copy like the movement effect on the Scribe, which is a shorter range, leading the witness. Only range 8, but if Bog is, I don't know, roughly where I put him, he might be more defensive, we position this, but sort of somewhere in that neighborhood, that doesn't require me to like be outrageously aggressive in order to get at him. And then with that upgrade copied, then actually turn into Klaus. And the sort of primary function of Klaus, especially in a Lucius 2 crew, I think is the application of Infiltrator, which I should probably pull Klaus up here. But Klaus is not like an unhireable model in his own right. And I think he's more reasonable to hire in Lucius 1, essentially because some of the upsides that you're getting for Lucius 2 by not hiring him, you get by hiring him. But the rule on his card that I think tends to suck up a lot of the oxygen in the room when he's discussed, and for good reason, is Infiltrator, because it's a pretty crazy rule, right? Enemy models do not treat this model as an enemy model for their actions, abilities, and triggers. This model may choose to be affected. So the second part, where you get sort of some upsides for being sort of keyworded as part of your enemy crew, is nice, but actually I think it's the first part. Enemy models don't get to treat you as an enemy for their stuff is more powerful in most cases. And what that means is that there are a lot of enemy-only effects, like Laugh Off, if this model would be moved during an enemy model's activation or from an enemy model's effect. People tend to sort of mentally shortcut Laugh Off to just, I can't be moved by you, my opponent's means, right? Their tools. With obviously the exception that like obey effects get around it, because that's sort of just a different thing. That doesn't work in the Klaus, right? Because Klaus Klaus is not an enemy for the purpose of your abilities, which means that Laugh Off essentially doesn't see him as being relevant to its text. And so if I turn into Klaus with leading the witness and like a ski marker over here, I then move up. This is assuming I'm starting from in my DZ, which I might not be, but anyway, regardless. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and in this case I might have to move once more, which is a little annoying, but remember I replaced out of agent with an upgrade flip, so actually I have the AP to spare. Get up there, hit him with leading the witness, and he's only willpower 5, so unless something goes awry, that should work just fine. Maybe even get that ram trigger, which is pretty tasty. Apply staggered, which, given that there are a lot of ways for the Ballyhoo crew to try to rescue a model like this otherwise, that staggered is pretty impactful. And so then Bog goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and is staggered and pretty imperiled, right? Because of course I then also have Lucius ready to go with a scheme marker to flip and upgrade with, going into that next turn. And yeah, right, the party's going to get started very quickly, and that then naturally leads me towards having my own ability to score in your face pretty well set up. And so I think essentially the net effect here, the net takeaway is I think I would often be putting the replace upgrade and spending it relatively early turn 1, expecting that a lot of what I'm accomplishing attrition-wise turn 1 is coming out of Lucius putting himself forward, or maybe getting Agent kind of up the table and having Agent have access to a dive. But I don't necessarily think I want to dive in this one, just because the Clampetts are that good at doing damage, and I think it's sort of just doing the Ballyhoo crew a favor by letting them get access to my models for making attacks without having to make tough choices about where they're putting themselves on the table. And so I want to first sort of let them tell me what exactly they're doing, what their plan is for actually like being involved in the game. And to preserve access to the sort of spectrum of tools that I'm going to have to sort of capitalize on what I'm given. With, I think, the Clampetts or Bog as the two most likely models that I'm kind of going to be given, dangled to try to sort of figure out how to deal with early, and I have options, I think, to try to get to both. I think there are things that I can do productively with either. I just want to make sure that I keep things open so that I really can do what I'm capable of. And then just as it sort of occurred to me earlier, a shout out that I actually think Bryn would be kind of a cool model to Vanguard with in this one, because he's kind of annoying to deal with. He's willpower 7 and serene. And while Protected is another example of an ability that actually doesn't work into Klaus, because it's another enemy-only ability, notably Serene doesn't work either. The willpower 7 actually would be kind of a problem to get Bryn forward and into my crew, because assuming we have each have a king in hand, I can't actually reliably hit him. And it's expensive to defend that way, but I mean, that's the sort of trade that I think you have to be willing to make pretty happily on the Ballyhoo side. So if I see that, I will be sort of duly impressed, because I think that's a weird line to sort of consider. Bryn is not a frontliner in most cases, but people have that is a thing that does sometimes come up when people talk about him and how to get your value out of him, because he doesn't really do any damage. Is like he's sometimes weirdly difficult to actually attack effectively. But setting that aside, I'm figuring I'm either going to have to get a hermit out of the way and then go to town, or might and the other thing about Bog and Laugh Off is that you might think on the Ballyhoo side that you don't really need to worry about covering Bog with the hermit, because most of my ranged threat has more to do with displacement than damage, which if Bog, then I want to keep the ability to get around that in a way that really only Lucius can, or Obey Cruz, but whatever. Anyway, thank you all again. This should be another good game. Looking forward to it. Yeah, let me know what you think. And stick around to watch the game as well. Take care.